There's no shortage of tools and choices for producing high-quality music and audio with Linux. Switching to Linux as a musician or producer is easier now than ever. And if you've considered making the switch to Linux from your proprietary platform, but you're not completely sold on the idea yet, consider the fact that Linux has powerful modular audio routing capabilities and a nearly endless selection of casual and professional tools for manipulating, recording, and processing sound and audio. Linux-powered studios have made the switch for the flexibility, freedom from uncertainty of proprietary formats, and the enterprise-grade stability associated with Linux. In this video series, we'll lay out starting from scratch with free and open source as well as proprietary tools for beginners. We'll discuss the use cases and advantages of custom patched, real-time, and low latency kernels. I'll show you how Windows and Mac users can continue using most of their favorite VST instrument and effects plugins that they rely on from their current production workflows. We'll also showcase the many digital audio workstations available for Linux, including cross-platform DAWs like Reaper, Bitwig Studio, Renoise, and Mixbus by the famous Harrison consoles. We'll then look at the pre-configured Linux distros specifically designed for audio production, such as QJack Studio, AV Linux, and Ubuntu Studio, allowing you to minimize the learning curve and get right to work making music. Hello, beautiful and amazing people. I'm Jay, and you're watching DS Tech Media, where we cover everything tech, specializing in Linux and open source. Welcome back to part 3 of my guide to producing and recording music and audio with Linux. This is an ongoing series that aims to provide a comprehensive guide to working with music and audio with Linux and benefiting from the power and freedom of cost of open source software. And in this video, we're going to be looking at the digital audio workstations, or DAWs, and some other major software suites available. Some of these I've touched on in the previous videos, so I'll be repeating some information, but I'll also be adding additional information and demonstration. Real quick, just a recap of where we are and what we've already covered. In part 1, I explained the major parts of the Linux audio stack: ALSA, Pulse Audio, and Jack. We focused on configuring and using Jack, and we also looked at all of the various packages that I use in the audio production process. I also covered the differences between Jack 1 and Jack 2, and for the record, in this video, I'm using Jack 2 on Ubuntu 18.04. In part 2, we looked at Linux distros specifically for music production with Linux. So we looked at Ubuntu Studio, QJack Studio, and AV Linux. So if you're new here, you may want to start with part 1, and you'll be able to get to those by using direct links in the description below. So this is QJack-Control. It's a front end for configuring, connecting the Jack sound system. It's a central part of this tutorial, and I covered it more extensively in part 1, but right now we're going to be looking at it for a few specific things before we go any further. In the Connections tab, by default we have audio and MIDI tabs. But if we go into the settings window and then over to the miscellaneous tab, we can check this box, enable also sequencer support, and you'll get this dialog and it says you have to restart. So if we just go ahead and restart the QJack-Control app, we'll now have a third tab with our ALSA MIDI ports instead of the regular MIDI tab that shows our Jack MIDI port. Depending on how you're using MIDI, you'll be able to find MIDI ports to hardware or software in one of these two tabs, and that's what I'm trying to distinguish here. Before, when I showed you this, it wasn't running. Now it's running, and it has all of the connections I currently have. In MIDI, you'll see the QJack Studio Gear automation MIDI in. In ALSA, we have several things showing up here. There's the system MIDI through, there's the system MIDI out, the MPK MIDI to ins and outs, and that's this, my MPK MIDI controller. And then we have the Scarlett 2i4, which is my sound card, or my USB sound card, or digital to audio converter interface, whatever you want to call it. And then over here we have the Timidity software MIDI synthesizer, I think it is. I don't know, I've never honestly used it. So why the two tabs? Well, these MIDI here are what is connected to Jack. So QJack is connected to Jack with the automation in. However, all of our MIDI hardware over here is in ALSA's MIDI. And the reason for that is because in our setup here, under parameters, we are not using Jack MIDI driver. Our MIDI is all going through ALSA. If we were to enable the raw or sequencers, then the device that I'm using for Jack right now is my microphone. But if I was using, let's say, my Scarlett 2i4, which is right here in the list, that has its own MIDI ports, and I could technically set these up and enable Jack, and instead of appearing here, it would appear in this tab here. So in situations like this, where we might want to use MIDI from a different device than the device we're using, or just in general, we're going to have to use another program. Okay, so if we want to expose our MIDI controllers from ALSA to Jack, we can go into our terminal and type A2J MIDI D as in Damon -export. And now we have the ALSA to Jack MIDI bridge here. And now my MPK MIDI is in the MIDI tab as well as the everything else. So that's one way to get your MIDI functionality between the different systems. This is QJack Studio Gear, and this can be really useful if you want to process any type of audio through a microphone. However, there are all kinds of plugins available. There's even 3 types of instruments. So we've got a monosynth, organ, fluid synth, wavetable, and now the monosynth is here in the MIDI tab. Go ahead and link my controller. So yeah, you get the picture. And we've got quite a bit of things to pick from, but it's mostly about processing audio. I use it on my microphone, obviously. This only actually works with Jack. Next one is actually very important. This is Carla. So Carla is also running with Jack, and we can send events in Carla's MIDI, but it does not appear in ALSA. So once again, we'd have to rely on our ALSA to Jack MIDI bridge. And we've looked at Carla before in, I believe, part 2. And just like CAF, Carla can run as a standalone program or inside of your DAWs as a plugin in many cases. Carla is a Jack VST host. Let's go to configure. First of all, I would recommend going to main and enabling the experimental features, and the reason for that is you'll get support for more types of plugins if you enable that. So in here we've got LADSPA, DSSI, LV2, VST2, VST3, Sound Font 2 and 3, and SFZ, which is also another type of sound font. These are all of the plugins supported by Carla, and these are the directories where Carla is going to search for them. For Windows VST and Windows DSSI, it's going to use Wine, but that enables plugin bridges, Wine bridges. So about the types of plugin: LADSPA, DSSI, LV2, and of course VSTs. Under Engine, we have the core component, and that's the audio driver. Carla can actually work with ALSA, so no Jack needed. You can run it purely with Jack, or can run it Jack with ALSA MIDI. If I was running it with ALSA MIDI, the Jack MIDI interfaces would appear under the ALSA tab here. We have 3 main tabs here: Rack, Patch Bay, and Logs. So here we can see the same thing as we see under our connections, except it all appears on one plane instead of the tabs. So all of these are here in red, and all of these are here in blue. So basically audio ports are blue, MIDI ports are red. And once you get everything you like set up here, we can save them as studios. It can also work with Jack Transport to sync it with other software that supports Jack Transport, and it even has an option to use Ableton Link. Let's just go ahead and add a plugin. So before I mentioned CAF, our CAF instruments are here. That's because I only have instruments selected. If I hit effects, boom, we have all of our CAF effects available here. But I think we want an instrument. I decided to go with DSK Mini Drums 2. That is a VST2 plugin. It's bridged. It's a Windows 32-bit. Oh, and by the way, when we do refresh, we can scan for all of our various plugins. So native, Linux 32, Windows 32, and Windows 64. So now I've added the DSK Mini Drums. I'm going to route my MIDI controller in to Carla now, and I'm going to route Carla's audio out. If we come over here, we can now click the gear, and the GUI for the plugin will appear. And in some cases, you may see the same plugin listed multiple times, like this one here, AM Synth. And the reason for that is because we have 3 different versions of that. We have the Linux VST or LV2, the standard VST2, and the DSSI. And these are sound fonts. Anyways, that's Carla. And now I think it's time to move on to the actual DAWs. Let's take a look at Hydrogen. Hydrogen is not actually a digital audio workstation. It is actually a drum machine, but it includes enough features that it should be mentioned in this list. So if we go to QJack-Control, you'll notice Hydrogen appears in the ALSA MIDI, so we don't have to run the ALSA to Jack MIDI bridge. And if we go to preferences, we can use Jack, ALSA, and there's port audio, which I don't think anybody really uses anymore. As you can see, it's already connected to my Jack system. And under MIDI, we're using the ALSA MIDI, but we could switch to Jack MIDI or port MIDI once again. And there's even an editor here for setting up custom MIDI events and actions, which I have never actually used. And our drum kits will appear here. Up here is our sequencer, so we can set different patterns to occur at the same time and in sequence. Here we program the beats. And if we wanted to, we could change the size. So I have it set to 8, but we can adjust that up and down. And here we can adjust the resolution. I have it set to 30 seconds. But we could get really detailed and set it to 64. And under this, we can actually change where the note is played. So make the note higher or lower. These levels indicate our velocity, and we can also change the panning, the lead and lag, and the note key as well. Up top here we have our controls. We can loop, fast forward, we can choose whether to play the pattern we're working on or the song. We can set the beats per minute here and enable or disable a metronome. It is jack transport capable. These two buttons here enable jack transport and can make it the jack master. Here we have our instrument rack. So as we select the different instruments over here in the editor, they appear here, and we can change their properties. You can randomize the pitch. You can even assign them to different MIDI channels and notes. And using this, we can change how each sample is played. And there's even layering for each instrument. So these are all high tom layers. And you can load or delete layers here. If we open this, we can actually edit the layer. On this tab, we can show the sound library. All of these are different Hydrogen drum kits, and if you expand them, you can see everything in it. And you will have to actually add some of these drum kits. They don't all come out of the box with it, so it could vary. There is also a comprehensive mixer. We can see every note being sounded and mix it. Also in the mixer, we can add effects to the instrument on a per instrument basis. These are all LADSPA effects. I'm going to add some reverb to this drum, and we'll edit it in here. I guess my only real gripe with Hydrogen is that the interface is a little bit difficult. And once you do have your song, you actually record it like a track. And when it comes time, we can export as a song, a MIDI file, or a Lilypon file. You can also export patterns. And if you want to get the same extensive list of Hydrogen drum kits that I had in this video, you can get them from this forum post on Linux Musicians, which is also a highly recommendable resource. And it says here, just open Hydrogen, go into import library, add this URL as a source. After you update the list, you'll see 100 plus Hydrogen drum kits, including these. You can get individual kits from musical artifacts with a hyphen in between musical and artifacts.com. You can also create your own drum kits, and this opensource.com article, How to Create a Hydrogen Drum Kit for Fun and Profit, details the entire process. And if you want the links to both of these addresses, I'll be providing them in a document that will be in the description of this video down below. I'm probably going to upload the document to Hive, and it's going to be the first part of a much larger, full written and composed guide to accompany this entire video series. And it'll have all of my notes, links, and references and everything that I used to make this video and more. So if that interests you, you can find that link in the description below. So this is a DAW called Renoise 3, and I don't see this DAW talked about very often. It is not open source, it's actually proprietary and very unique in its style, called a tracker. And in a tracker style DAW, everything is actually laid out vertically rather than horizontally. And it comes preloaded with a bunch of demo songs to, I guess, kind of give you a feel for how it works. Some of it is specific functions. So we've got beat slicing, beat sync, wobbles, cross track routing, delay column, slide, glide and pitch, etc. and so forth. And then we have actual songs. RNS. As you can see, the tracks are actually horizontal here. Got the 909-ish track, hollow bass, string cuts, stringer, snappy triangle, snappy accent, sub, talk, and mist. This is the editor window. If we open over here, this is the mixing window. This is the sampler window, plugin window, and the MIDI window. Go up here to edit and preferences. We can change the theme. They really load you up with themes. Plenty of themes here. And a lot of them are actually really good. I kind of like this one. On Linux, it supports LADSPA, DSSI, and VST plugins. It also supports the OSC or Open Sound Control and has a server built in for that. And that's all kind of complicated. Basically, you need to know how to script with its API, but you can remotely control it with other instruments. I don't fully understand. This is probably one of the DAWs I know the least about. This is the demo version, so I can't render anything. The full version costs $75 US. We've got our MIDI controls here, pretty extensive. For audio, it only supports ALSA and jack. It does have jack transport support, and you can also set it to compensate PDC latencies. So that's a feature that basically tries to compensate for any delay and latency from plugins. Another one of the unique features of Renoise is the ability to render your plugins to samples. So I don't know exactly how it works, but essentially you do whatever you want to do with the plugin, and then you can just render it to a sample. And I think the sample still allows a certain amount of flexibility without actually having to run the plugin and bog your workflow down or whatever, depending on how much computer power you have. In the plugins list, we've got not all of my plugins are here, but a good amount of them are, and anything that's not here I could simply load by running Carla as a plugin. So that's that. Speaking of plugins, this is actually the Redux plugin, and you can get this separately from Renoise itself. This is also the demo version, which means it generates some static sound every so many minutes or seconds. Actually comes with quite a few presets. Oh wow, we even have some breaks. Okay, so I cannot figure out how to make a track from scratch in this program. But what I can do, luckily, is play one of the tutorial songs that they have included. I'm going to go ahead and do that for you because I like this one. It's pretty cool. there you have it. That is Renoise 3.1. Pretty cool. I haven't fooled around with it enough to fully demonstrate it, but it definitely deserves a spot in my guide to Linux audio. So this DAW I have mentioned earlier in the series as Traction T7. It has been rebranded to Waveform, and it is a proprietary DAW, but it's available in the Pro and free versions. And Traction also makes plugins and instruments. The underlying technology is open source called Juice, and it is actually used to make some of the open source plugins I have featured at points in this video series. So let's jump in to Waveform 11. Okay, so here we are in the setup. Is connected to jack. Apparently it also works with ALSA. All of my jack outputs show here and inputs are here. We've got project templates, singer-songwriter, band recording, house of worship, podcast, EDM. So they got different setups pre-configured for your needs, which is pretty cool. Set up a MIDI device. And we want the MPK Mini. Let's see, I can scan for plugins. And it looks like it's doing a pretty good job of found a good bit of VST plugins. And it even managed to find some VST3 plugins, which is interesting because a lot of times those will not work. And now I'm going to scan for the LADSPA plugins, and it looks like it found all of those as well. And it looks like we can drag them over here, create a little favorites list. One thing that I am noticing is Carla does not appear to be in here. You can also scan for loops. In order to download a demo song, I apparently need to go with Waveform Free or upgrade to Waveform Pro. I'm in demo mode. So this is an EDM project that I guess comes by default. Unfortunately, I cannot seem to get my MIDI controller working in the demo mode, and their servers aren't responding in order for me to unlock the standard free version, which is kind of ridiculous. So this demo is going to be limited to whatever I can do in demo mode. The interface is a little strange, but it's also somewhat intuitive. So there's a lot of tracks here. I'll tell you what, I'm just gonna play a little bit of it for you. So the editing process is pretty straightforward. Unfortunately, I can only really use the virtual keyboard.
Waveform is currently in demo mode. Please start a 30-day free trial or unlock with a license to disable this warning.
So I would be lying if I said that I knew what I was doing here. This DAW is quite confusing. Well, I did manage to find the plugin itself. So this DAW definitely has a lot of potential. I think I'm going to need to unlock it before I can actually give a proper review.
Waveform is currently in demo mode. Please start a 30-day free trial or unlock with a license to disable this warning.
So now we're going to be looking at LMMS, and this is probably my personal favorite DAW that I have used the most for audio production. I came to Linux with experience in Fruity Loops or FL Studio and Linux Multimedia Studio, and it's built as a drop-in replacement, and it sort of shares the same workflow, design, and even the same shortcuts as FL Studio. It's a production focused DAW, and its main drawback is that it does not have a way to record audio. You can't record live audio in any way. It does come preloaded with tons of samples. It also includes a whole bunch of its own effects. These are all LADSPA effects specific to Linux, and it comes with a large selection of instruments and synthesizers. So we've got over a dozen synthesizers, plus a sound font player, a gig file player. We've got some 8-bit Game Boy emulator. There's a Commodore 64 audio chip emulator. And most importantly, it also has two built-in VST external plugin hosts. So we've got the Vestige, and then we have Carla Patch Bay and the Carla Rack. So this particular version that I'm using is an app image, which is usually the most up-to-date way to get LMMS. Another interesting feature is how it deals with MIDI. I have LMMS running through Jack, but you'll notice that it doesn't appear in MIDI or the ALSA yet. If we right-click here and go to MIDI, my MIDI controller does appear here. And it is working. There's no need to even set anything up. If your MIDI device is plugged in, it should appear here. So if we go to settings, we've got three options for plugin embedding, and that's how your plugins appear when you're running them. You can embed them using the Qt API or the X-embed protocol, or you can just use no embedding, in which they will appear as their own individual windows. I'm just going to leave it on no embedding. We go to audio. Got a lot of audio options here: Soundio, SDL, Pulse Audio, Port Audio, OSS, Jack, and also they're all supported here. So we've even got auto save that we can enable and set up for different intervals. And if you go to MIDI, have it set to also sequencer, but also raw, Jack MIDI, and OSS raw are also available. One important thing is the directories tab, and we can point this to our working directory, which might be where we want to keep all of our samples and projects. Got gig files, you can set it to that directory. If you have SF2 files, you can set it to that directory, and you can set VST plugin directory. By default, it should be .vst in your home folder. LADSPA, STK raw waves, our default sound font file, and here you can change your theme or your background artwork. And the way it's set up, we've got multiple windows inside of the main window. All of these buttons here will bring that up. This is your controller rack, where we can add our low frequency oscillator controller, and we can set this up to run just about any setting channels and send our individual instruments to various channels. You've got a dedicated effects channel mixer. Got the automation editor window, the piano roll window, the beat and bassline editor, and the song editor. So this is the built-in kicker plugin. And we can use this to make pretty much any type of bass sound. So if you want like a nice bass drop, you can play with that. And the workflow is very much based on patterns. So we can set our patterns here and they'll default to a particular note. And obviously that's way too high. We want to change that. We can open it in the piano roll. And down here at the bottom, you can change your velocity levels. And if you click here, you can change the panning to left and right. So we've also got the plugins panel, the projects panel with all of your projects, the samples panel, the presets panel. Most of these are presets for LMMS plugins. The kicker can do just about any type of drum synth, not just bass drums. Like so these are all included. Oh, earlier when I said it couldn't record, there is one exception. It can record MIDI input. And the way it works is all of your one-hit drum samples go into the bassline editor. But any of the instrument plugins can also go in here. or they can go into the song editor itself. We've also got the sample track, which basically allows you to open any sample. It comes preloaded with an automation track. You can use this to set different triggers for just about anything in the DAW. And this beat baseline track represents this section here. So and each one retains all of the samples or instruments, and of course we can clone them too. These are all of the various built-in synthesizers. This is the same notes playing through all of the emulators. So in the beat baseline editor window is where you can do your sampler programming. And you have like a fixed grid, and you can actually add steps to each one. And additionally, you can add steps to a single instrument. And up here is where you would program your beat baseline steps so that it'll play once, and I can drag it, it'll play twice, 3 times, 4 times. Over here, we could clone it, or we can just add another one, which appears down here. And you can, of course, reorder them. And we'll just start a new one here real quick. And you can basically mix all of these individually. And up in the song editor, the beat baseline tracks don't have mixers because they're made up of individual tracks in their own sense. You can also solo and disable them. And you don't have to stick to simply programming them. You can open even these in your piano roll. And we can change our grid too if we want to get real precise with them. You can select more than one note, drag them around, and you can also deal with scales, chords, and we have 2 separate recording modes. You can record just what's going on in your current track's piano roll, or we can play along with the song to record as well. And of course there's quantization. Should also mention that up top here we can turn our metronome on. And this eye icon is the what's this icon, and you can use that to find out what a control does. Anything that turns to a question mark can be clicked, and you get this little dialog box explaining what the function of it is. You can change your tempo, your BPM. This is your track length count. We can also, of course, change our time signatures up here. This is the master volume, and this is the master pitch. Goes up and down 12 semitones in either direction. You can also see your visualizer here, and you have a small CPU usage bar here. One thing I really like about LMMS is how everything is very modular. So each one of these plugins has several tabs here. So we've got the envelope, filter, and LFO, and we can enable or disable any of these and change them so we can run any type of filter, that's included here. Then you've got your stacking and arpeggios. You've got your per plugin effects where we can add from any of these effects. We've got all of the LADSPA effects, but also it's able to inventory the VSTs in your VST folder, and they will appear here as effects as well. And then we've got the enable MIDI input output controls, and you can also adjust the custom bass velocity for your notes. And this last one enables or disables the use of the master pitch, which is up here. By default, all of them have that on. Oh, I should also mention, even our drum track are their own plugin window individually. For each sample you get one, and it has its own settings that you can tweak here. The length, you can even reverse your sample. And of course it has all of the same tabs over here. Just a lot of plugins and a lot of effects, a lot of tuning can be done. And that's just with the out of the box stuff. That's before you even add your own stuff. And every individual plugin window can be sent to a different effects number, and that corresponds to the various effects channels that we can add. So all of the effects chain will be applied, and also you can do another form of mixing here. The LFO controller is very unique. Go ahead and open up another project here. So I went ahead and loaded this Virgin Choir VST. And here we have an LFO controller, and just about any adjustable function in LMMS you can right click and connect to a controller. So here we have MIDI controller, and we've got channel and controller, and you can select auto detect, and I can come down here to one of the tabs on my MIDI controller. I can hit OK, and that allows me to manually adjust that with that knob. Additionally, we could come down here to the user controller. Controller 1 is this one here, and this is a form of automation. So now, as you can see, it's fluctuating, and that's set at 1,000 or 100 times. This is set at 1 time. And then of course we can always set automation as well. So if we wanted to turn chord stacking on, we would just have to hold control and drag it over here, and we'd have automated octave chord stacking when we hit this point in the playback. So I'm going to turn stacking off. I'm going to let it play. And see for each single note, the octave notes are being stacked as well, and that is off until the automation trigger is reached here. And you can change it. You can have like a gradual slope, or even a more fine-tuned, like a wave, and various things there. As far as the Vestige VST, it searches your home folders.vst folder, and it can work with DLL files and Windows exe files. So basically, this VST host is specifically for hosting Windows VSTs, whereas Carla Rack and Carla Patch Bay are for all the different types of VSTs, Linux VSTs, etc. and so forth. So here's a track with a bunch of plugins that I've got loaded. So none of these are really fully fleshed out songs, just some stuff I've done in the past that I figure I could use to show you some of what I make with LMMS. All the music that is ever in my videos is usually made by me. And, you know, I know a lot about this program, so I could spend a lot of time talking about it, but I know that this video is already going to be pretty long, so I'm probably going to get to the next one. I do really love this DAW. I really wish it did have a way to record audio, but other than that, you know, if you're used to Fruity Loops, this is going to be a DAW that you can just pick up and run with. At least it was for me. So up next, we're going to be looking at Reaper. And if you don't know, Reaper is a cross-platform DAW. It's available on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. And I'd say it's probably the most popular cross-platform DAW that's available for Linux. If you look online, you'll find lots of people talking about why they left Pro Tools or Logic or Cubase to use Reaper. And the reason for that obviously varies from person to person. But for one, Reaper is extremely flexible and customizable. I definitely would consider it to be professional grade. It comes packed with effects processing plugins, insane amounts of tools, and pretty much unlimited customization. The free trial is unlimited and has no restrictions of any kind. The full license is $220 for 2 years of updates, and the student or license for anyone making under $20,000 a year using it is only $60. So cost is obviously a big factor. It comes preloaded with several themes, and if you go to the Reaper website, you can download more, and you can drag and drop to install them, which makes things very, very simple. Here on the Reaper website, reaper.fm, under resources, there's the Reaper stash, and you can find effects chains, key maps, language packs, drum maps, plugins, custom actions, themes, sounds, scripts, etc., and so forth. You can also find the user guide and the forum. It's a very active community. One powerful feature about it is the ability to write automation and scripts with it. It has its own language for that called EEL, but if you know any Python or Lua, you can also put that to use. From what I understand, even a person who's not a coder can make use of the scripting. Aside from the pre-installed themes, we've got a new theme adjuster. And with this, we can adjust things like the color for just about every panel. You can also change how the track control panel looks. You can change the mixer control panel. And they also have several color palettes that are preset. You can also change how envelopes are handled as well. Under options, if we go to preferences, we got support for jack, ALSA, pulse audio, and there are just so many options here. I don't think I could really cover even half of them. One thing I want to include, Reaper Remote, and with this you could have Reaper installed on another computer and essentially have a plugin host on that other computer so that you can run your plugins remotely and save and conserve resource usage on the main computer you're actually working on, which is really cool. I believe Logic also has that feature. So here is the this is like the basic layout. We've got the track control panel where we can add our tracks, and additionally they appear down in the mixer section, and you can actually set layouts up any way you want. You can move anything around. Over here we've got the Media Explorer, and one cool thing about that is for your samples that you're previewing, you can match project tempo. You can do half and double tempo as well. You can even set where the output of the preview goes through, and we can adjust the pitch and rate independently as well. One unique feature about Reaper is that the tracks are format agnostic, so whether you're doing an audio recording track, sample track, stereo or mono, or even MIDI, all can happen in the same track. And if we zoom here in on the track, we can hit the effects, and this shows us all of our effects and plugins for this particular track. I have this UHE Podolsky plugin running. Right here you'll see local processing. If we were using this with a remote computer somewhere on the local network, that capability would appear here. Opening up the plugins library, we got a bunch of categories here. VST, VST instrument, VST3 and VST3 instrument, LV2, LV2 instrument. JS is actually Reaper's JavaScript plugins. Kakos is the company that develops Reaper. So all of these are plugins included with Reaper. And they even give you 3 instrument plugins. We've got the Resampomatic 5000, the Resynth DR, and Resynth. And as far as the included plugins, got vocoder, reverberate, reverb, retune, resurround pan, resurround, restream, repitch, gain reduction, general dynamics, oscilloscope meter, spectral hold, lots of quality effects processing plugins. So I recorded some MIDI notes, and we double click them and we get the MIDI note editor. We've got a rectangular note, just a normal mode. We can switch to triangular notes for drums, diamond notes for drums. By default, just like in LMMS, got velocity down here, but we can add all of these different aspects like channel pressure, pitch, program, bank, program select, slider, and there's even, there's tons of things that we can add. So if we want to add another one, just put it here, and certain ones we can even draw the edits in. We've also got an on-screen virtual MIDI keyboard and a built-in scale finder. There's also a routing matrix, a wiring diagram, grouping matrix, and a region render manager. You can make your own custom toolbars. Got this action list where we can literally find any single capability of the DAW with a single search, and we can set shortcuts, etc. and so forth. So like I said, extremely customizable. We can add envelopes for just about anything to any track or group of tracks. We can make buses. For certain Reaper native plugins, we can show them embedded in the track control panel. So this is the Re-EQ. Find another one. so we can edit them right here in the on the fly. Down here we've got routing for track 1. We can add ins or outs, new sends. We can add new monitors, new outputs. There's absolute control over any aspect of the DAW. And most of my plugins are detected. Some of them are a little fidgety, but for the most part everything works. And Carla works if there's a particular one you can't get to run. The included plugins aren't the fanciest, but as far as quality goes, they're actually awesome. And we've also got all of these extensions. These are ones that came with it, so auto render with different batch rendering and project settings, command parameters, contextual toolbars, Q bus generator, cycle action editor, envelope processor, find groove tool. I guess this is for applying swing, label processor, loudness, low frequency oscillator generator, live configs, marker utilities, notes, project management, startup actions, reconsole, region playlist, resources, snapshots, tempo, zoom preferences, and SWS options. This is a project that I actually produced with LMMS, and I've exported all of the tracks to Reaper. So once again, I can't stress how lightweight this is of a program. There's even a portable runtime that you can keep on a USB flash drive and take anywhere with you. Even though it's free to use, has a rapid development cycle, very collaborative community, it is proprietary. So if you're all about open source, that might be a drawback to you, but I would definitely suggest trying this out. And maybe if Ardour wasn't really your thing, I think Reaper could have what you need. So now we're going to be looking at Ardour and Harrison Mixbus, and they're two DAWs, but we're going to combine them into one section because Mixbus is based on Ardour. Ardour is essentially the flagship DAW of open source software. It pretty much fills the same role as Pro Tools, so it's built for producing, recording, and mixing. I would say it's kind of an all-around workstation. And if we go to a new session, we've got 4 templates here. There's the empty one, the advanced session, a recording session, and live band. I'm going to go with the empty one, and it's scanning for plugins. Alright, so let's go ahead and open up the preferences. You can change how solos work, change the modifier keys, you can set the buffering, and there is jack transport capability built in. As far as appearances go, we can scale the interface size up and down. We've got these presets: Cubase, Studio, Dark, Clear Gray, Caneville, Blueberry Milk. And it also can do some video editing work as well. So now let's compare that to Harrison Mixbus. So Harrison Mixbus is not free, and it comes in two variants. There's the standard Mixbus, which is $89, and 32C, which is $349. And the difference between those is basically with 32C, you get a better EQ, 4 more effects buses for a total of 12, and 1 through 8 can assign to the effects buses 9 through 12. More panning, more switchable EQ sends, and it includes Tapex. And here's a comparison of what the buses look like. 32C is designed after Harrison Console's 32C model. And Harrison Consoles is known for making analog tape consoles that are hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they were used to record lots of the classic albums from AC/DC, etc. and so forth. Mixbus also includes proprietary background digital signal processing that's supposed to emulate the tape effect, and it's focused on mixing especially, and not just recording. Steve Harris works on both Ardour and Mixbus. Typically I think Mixbus is going to get newer features before Ardour does. You also get all the technical support and warranty and everything else when you purchase a Mixbus license versus Ardour, where you're on your own with support. The interface is slightly different. Each bus in Mixbus comes with compression and EQ built into each one, and you have all of these channel and effects buses, which also have various features built in. For someone who's not working professionally, I don't think the added benefits of Mixbus are going to make a huge difference to you over Ardour. You can demo it for free, however, there will be static at various intervals throughout. But for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to be focusing on Ardour. So I went ahead and opened up a project I had already started here. I've got an audio MIDI track, an audio track, and another audio track. And if I bring up jack connections, you can see that there is a whole lot going on here. Ardour has master audio out and monitor audio out, LTC out. There's click audio out 1 and 2, which is left and right, auditioner audio out left and right, and then each track also has its own outputs. And for the inputs, there is a corresponding master in, monitor in, LTC in, etc. and so forth. So you can get very nuanced with how you're routing your audio. If we come over to MIDI, there's MIDI clock in, MIDI control in, MMC in, MTC in, and scene in. And this does aim to be a professional DAW. Just like with Mixbus, we've got the mixer window and the editor window. Over on the side here, we've got management of all of our regions, tracks, and buses. And we can handle arming the records, soloing, and even the visibility. We can hide all the tracks from here or make them all visible. We've got like a timeline overview here so that we can manage what we're seeing on screen. Because this is a MIDI track, we have a piano roll right here. I've heard some people mention that they do not really like the way that MIDI editing is handled. Okay, so here we have the editor or recording window. All of your MIDI track will have the MIDI editor actually in the track space, and in order to view that, you have to increase the size of the track. So it might actually be hard to find if you're not familiar with the program, but if we drag it out, we get the piano roll here, and we can expand, move up or down the piano roll as well. Naturally, we can also have MIDI input, and depending which track we select, that specific track's mixer appears over here. And each mixer is actually its own stack of effects or instruments. In this case, the MIDI track, I have 3 separate instrument plugins. By default, each one comes with a fader, but I have 3 separate instruments in this mixer. So we got the Black Pearl drum kit, which is not being routed out. If I want to route it out, I drag it down. This is the Zebra 2. And then we have this one, which is the Surge. Drag it down. But for right now, I think we want to play with the Zebra. So if we wanted to go ahead and record some MIDI notes, we would arm the track, arm the record, and then hit play, and we can start playing our notes. Then we have this variety of tools here to work with. So this is the grab tool, and it allows us to grab and move large sections. We have a cut tool, which allows us to slice through sections. And then we can move them like that. In the ripple mode, they move. All the ones past it will also move. In slide mode, we can move individual sections, and then there's the lock mode that will lock them all. There's also a range select, a time stretch, which lets us stretch notes to fit into or make them longer or shorter. We have audition mode, which lets us play them back at different speeds. Smart mode and the grab, we can do grab functionality along with the range select, so it combines the two into one. Then we have the standard MIDI draw, where we can draw, move, and edit the MIDI notes velocity and note itself. And if we right click, we can edit and we can change pitch, velocity, MIDI channel. Additionally, there's quantize, delete, transpose, which lets us move them octaves up or down. So it moves the note all the way up here. And there is the internal edit mode, which lets us select chunks of MIDI notes, which we can then extend or shorten. We have auto return, which allows you to return to where you started. If you turn that off, it just pauses where you stop. We can focus on or zoom in on playhead, mouse point, ed point, left, right, and center. We've got no grid, grid, and magnetic grid, and it can follow beats, marks, buses, etc., and so forth. We can monitor all the input or all of the disc playback, layered and non-layered recording. We can also increase or decrease tracks. By the way, if you're new to Ardour, you may not realize your MIDI editor is hidden within the track. You actually have to drag that track out to expose the editing area and the piano roll. When we're doing any type of recording, the timeline will actually mark X runs so that we can maybe go back and fix mistakes that may have occurred during that X run in the recording. Over here, we've got controls for everything that appears. We have snapshots for taking different snapshots of the entire editing at that time. There's tracks and buses, which allows us to change visibility and arming, recording, auditioning, soloing for the tracks individually. There's track and bus groups and regions and mark. Additionally, our regions and marks appear up here so that we can quickly select them. If I go down to this audio track here, we'll go into select mode, select a section. We can play or loop the range and zoom to the range. There's loudness analysis as well as spectral analysis. Also, within each track, we have tons of automation parameters hidden that we can show, and they'll appear down here like this one. And there's manual play, write, and touch automation modes. Over here is our current track, and as we switch through the tracks, attributes will appear here. If we want to see all the tracks, of course, we can go over to the mixer. And within each track, you have your own pin connections, so we have complex routing capabilities for every track individually. We can monitor input or disc, isolate the solo, lock the solo, arm the solo. We can add comments to each track. Down here under master, we can add audio ports, MIDI ports, send it to the other tracks, bring up the routing grid. Here we have the routing grid. We get a complex visualization of routing for just about everything from the routing grid. Additionally, we can create track and bus groups, and when adding new tracks, there's audio tracks, MIDI tracks, audio and MIDI track, audio buses, MIDI buses, VCA masters, and live band tracks. This track template helps create tracks for a typical pop rock band. You'll be prompted to assemble your session from a list of suggested tracks. Optionally, tracks may be assigned to sensible groups: vocals, guitar, drums. Each track will be pre-assigned a color corresponding to its group. Tracks may be assigned gates and other plugins. The script is developed in Lua and can be duplicated and or modified to meet your needs. That's another thing, that we have the ability to do complex scripting in Lua. And much like with the other DAWs, there's a ton of different features that I'm not able to get into in this video just due to the time limitations alone. But hopefully I've been able to show you Ardour is a professional grade piece of software that's available entirely for free. And beyond that, there's Harrison Mixbus, which is very affordably priced at $89. That adds some extra features such as technical support. Not to mention, you can also buy more plugins from Harris, which you could also use in Ardour. But as far as a free digital audio workstation, Ardour really does, I think, hit the mark in terms of professional grade. And I think if you look at the reviews out there, you'll find that that is the case. So I hope I've done enough to properly demonstrate Ardour's capacity for recording and producing and mixing. And also, I should mention, Ardour also has an entire online manual that is very in-depth and goes into just about every aspect of the DAW. You can find it at manual.ardour.org. So next up, we're going to look at Bitwig Studio. This is version 4. Bitwig is not free. However, there is a unlimited demo, and the only limitations are you cannot save or export. As far as the versions go, there's the 16 track for $99. The full version is $3.99. We've got 4 templates to choose from, and then they have 2 demo projects. Come over here to the settings tab, down to audio. It's connected to jack, also supports ALSA and pulse audio. One thing I will note, I tried installing this as a snap package and jack would not work in the snap package, so there's something to note there. We come down to controllers. I've already selected my MPK Mini and it detected that without me having to do anything with jack, etc. and so forth. Under locations, you can add your plugin locations, music locations, sound content, your library projects. Come down to plugins, it has already scanned and collected a lot of my plugins, and it has its own plugin host built in. Unfortunately, you do not have support for Linux LV2 plugins or like LADSPA plugins, and no Carla plugin support. However, if you want to run a plugin that it does not support, you can run Carla separately, and that's kind of a compromise. So let's go ahead and jump into this performance set template. And also I should mention, Bitwig is from the creators of the quite popular Ableton Live, and it's also available on Windows and Mac OS. So this is one of the most intricate DAWs that I've ever used, and despite being so complex, it's actually pretty simple to pick up. And one thing I really love about it is when you select a track with an instrument, for instance, the classic drums, it just instantly picks up your MIDI controller. So down at the bottom, we've got our panel switcher. This is the inspector panel here to the left, and it's pretty much contextual information depending on what you select. If I select this instrument, we can see the voices, voice stacking's off, active voices for every aspect of the polysynth here. But then if I select, say, this scene, we get context for the notes, expressions, various things about that, and we can select clips from each scene. This is the range view, this is the mix view, and this is the edit view. And you'll notice that when you switch between them, different options appear down here at the bottom. So under mix, the mixer is constant, but we can also bring up the detail editor here. This is the automation editor. This down here is the device panel. And just about any icon that you hover over down here at the bottom, you'll get some tips on what it does and kind of helps guide you through it. And this is a on-screen keyboard panel. and it's got various keyboard layouts. Over here we have the browser panel. In the browser we've got, these are devices, basically plugins, I believe is what that's referring to. All of our presets are here. And it's that easy to get another instrument added to the whole mix. These are all bass presets. And over here we've got the drum machine, and in the drum machine, that's only a 16 grid of individual samples, so we can come down to a different one here, samples that are included in the kit, and we can add those. So you can just assemble your own drum kits right there. I love that. And then we come over here to the detail editor. We've got your kind of typical note editor, and we can switch between drum editor style, which hides the unused notes. So if you've got your song kind of written down here and you just want to make adjustments, you can easily move to that. Or if you're trying to compose your song, this is the view you're probably going to want to go with. And kind of like in Ardour, we've got several tools here: pointer tool, time selection, pen, knife, eraser tool. And down here at the bottom, you can choose whether or not to audition notes, turn the audition off, and it won't play as we move it around. We hit this little switch here, we can change 6 different attributes. So we've got velocity, chance, pressure. We can change the panning, the gain, and the timbre. Down here we have something called micro pitch expression editing, and this is something that I kind of love because we can add bending to notes. So you've just got absolute control over editing of the notes, and it's just amazing. As I said before, it's unfortunate that we don't have Carla rack or patch bay support built right in. But if we absolutely had to, I can always bring up Carla and run it in its own process and then patch it into its own track in Bitwig, which, you know, that's a sacrifice, but it might actually be kind of worth it just with the amount of extra features and even their own plugins that you get with Bitwig. So if we come over here under devices, like I said, this is your plugins and System VST2 plugins. The AVL drums plugins are here. And when it comes to the built-in instruments, they're actually just really awesome. So this is a polysynth. And the user interface for this is amazing. But another interesting capability that's native to Bitwig is grid instruments. This preset is dimensional hang and it says polygrid. So here it is. This is what they mean by grid. Build it yourself synthesizer, where you can add all of the modular pieces to the synthesizer. People that work with synthesizers will get a lot more out of this. I don't really know like synthesizer theory, but if you come up here, we have all the pieces, LFO, clock, transport, and you can literally build your own or use the ones that they include. And you can even pop that out, make it its own window. This is the FM synthesizer. This is the polymer instrument. And I guess it's kind of like a semi-percussive instrument. Oh, here we go. Organ. So we've got FM4. We've got the organ. Phase 4. Polygrid. Polymer. Polysynth. And the samplers. So those are all the native Bitwig plugins. So another useful feature of Bitwig is something called comping, where you can record yourself playing an instrument as takes, and then it lines them up so you can see the similarities and differences, and then you can actually pick and choose the pieces that you want, so you can get the best parts of something that you've recorded several times. Comping, where we take the best parts and record them in separate instances of the same clip or instrument, and then pick out the best ones for a... Just thought that was worth mentioning. So anyways, there's no way I could show you everything that's in Bitwig, but I will say that this is my first time using it to produce this video, and I'm very, very impressed with it as a DAW. It's almost tempting to buy the license, but I don't know if I actually need Bitwig. It's always a possibility. I love the built-in instruments. They're very close to having like a real synthesizer. You can get a lot of different sounds out of them. The drum machine is one of my favorites that I've come across. Still very impressive, and just overall I really love the look and feel and just the workflow of Bitwig. Definitely think it's one of the top DAWs that we reviewed here. And with that, we have reached the end of part 3 of the guide to Linux audio, music, and production. This is by no means an exhaustive list of the DAWs available for Linux. There are others, but I do think that these are the most important DAWs available. It's regretful that I couldn't do a better demo of Waveform, but I couldn't even get their customer support to help me sort out the issues I was having, so there's that. And I will be putting together a document with resources and notes that will be linked in the description of this video. So if you're interested in that, check in the description below. And I will be trying to start part 4 very shortly. We're going to cover some very nuanced specifics in that. I will try to get it out in a more timely fashion. Each one of these projects has ended up being the most ambitious videos I've done, so that's why it's taken me so long to put part 3 out. Just like it took forever to put part 2 out, I'm trying to get it done. There's just so many hours in a day, and sometimes it's not easy. But if you enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up. Let me know your thoughts. Do you use any of the DAWs in the video? I'd love to hear your stories about making music with Linux. And if you like this type of content, please consider hitting the subscribe button and share this video to your Linux music groups. When you share, it really helps the channel grow. It's come a long way just in the time since I started this project, and these videos have done pretty well, and I want to thank you all for that. I thank you for watching, and I'll see you in part 4 or just in the next one.